personal defensive period. Now we divided into smaller groups, sacrificing our mutual defensive firepower upon the target most efficiently. The crucial moment. The moment around which the entire mission revolved was now in the steady hands of our bombardiers. After getting 80 hits on the two main ball-bearing plants, we could defend ourselves again. At least to the extent of evasive action against flak and fighter attack. But the main idea now was to get home fast.
Point that Rommel quit his African command.
Anyway, lights.
By the way, that was Black Tuesday.
Black Tuesday.
No way, remember that Black Tuesday. Well, I kind of like the historical medals here. This medal here, this little blue one with the gold frame, that we received that on a mission. It was just the first bomb division went in, and 420 men failed to return. On the planes that came back, there was 32 wounded and 4 dead. These two medals, the Air Medal and the DFC, which is the European Defense Ribbon, it represents 41,000 that went over that failed to return. These medals over here, these three in the Korean War. So to give you an idea of what a medal stands for, and I have one grandson, and when he was born, that was about the first thing my daughter said was, "Now, Dad, you have someone to give your medals to." So those are for my grandson. And then she said, "Well, Dad, they don't tell you anything. What do they mean?" So then I had to write a book over there to show her what happened and how I got those medals. I guess start off with just what a mission contains. They generally wake you up from anywhere from 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning, but generally you're not sleeping too much because if you know you're going out to die, a chance of dying tomorrow, you've got a lot on your mind. So they wake you up, or they come in, turn the lights on, and say, call out the mission, the crews that are on the fly that day. You go over and have breakfast, and then you meet in a room for a briefing to explain to you what the mission is. And so after everyone's in, and the doors are locked and guards are on it, in the front of the room, they have a map of Europe. And then they have, I think they just use knitting of yarn with red to outline your trip in, your target, and your trip back. So me and my crew, we'd always set up toward the front so we could see how much of the string was left over behind the shield. If there was a lot, well, it was just a short mission, but if there wasn't any string left down there, you started sweating out because you knew it was about a 10, 11-hour mission. So then as they raised the curtain, you could see where you was going. Then the officers would get up and explain where you was on pickup fighters and flak and everything and your target. And then your weatherman would give you the weather. And then you would go out and prepare the plane for the flight. And so then you just made the trip over. But when you woke up and had to go on a mission, there was one of 3 things that would happen. You would hope and pray that you made it back to England. The second one, you'd be on your way to a prison camp, or third, you'd be dead. So that's all you had to look forward to when you was scheduled for a mission. And the average lossage on a mission was 5%. I flew 35, so that means I had 175% not coming back. But, so I made it. But would anyone have questions they would like? It's easier if I have a question or something that for directed, you know, that kind of.
Fire off some questions.
Anybody have a good question?
Were there any like stormy or really bad weather situations where you still had to go out on missions?
Yes, that represents like Christmas Eve morning. You couldn't even see hardly the wingtips of your airplane, and you couldn't see the control tower. So they brought a portable and set it down at the end of your wingtip, and you had to take off on instruments. And they'd give you hold you a red light, 30 seconds, give you green, you took off. And on that morning, the two planes ran together in the sky just off the runway and burst in flame. Well, there were 20 guys gone. Another one cartwheeled off the end of the runway. So you had all that just before you took off. And we didn't come out above the clouds until we were above 10,000 feet. So you're in the clouds and planes. And that part of England was nothing but just air bases. And they was only maybe 5 or 10 miles apart. So you imagine what it's like up there in the clouds, all these people taking off. And the weather was bad. A lot of times your target would be bad and you wouldn't be able to hit your main target, so you'd have 3 targets to hit. So you could go to one of the other targets. Weather was, and then on the way back, it was awful. I mean, it was almost as bad as the mission is trying to land and when you can't see where you're landing. They didn't have all the radar like we have today for landing. You just had, at the end of the runway, they had lights. And if you get close enough where you can see them, if your red lights are too low, green lights are just right, and the amber lights, you're too high. Excuse me. So you try to stay in the green lights, and it brought you right in on the runway. So weather was a big problem. You know England, it's always seems to be raining, something wrong with it, foggy. Any other questions?
Not far away.
I have one.
Yes.
What years were you flying your missions? What was
1944.
44?
The year of the invasion into Europe. Excuse me. But most of the missions had run from 8 to 10 hours. Like we're taking go out on these missions. Sometimes you'd be called back in counter weather. And sometimes you'd be hold for weather and then take off later. And then that made it late getting back. The worst thing that hit you, I think, the most was that you came back. Be like this last one. Now they're all full. When you come back from a mission, say a third or a fourth of them aren't here anymore. So you go back to your barracks and all these empty bunks that had people in them that morning. Then the next morning, they're full again with new people. So it was just a constant turnover, and you never really had buddies outside of your own crew because they'd be here today and gone tomorrow. It's one of those type of deals. So you got too close to it, though. I know our tail gunner got kind of pretty good acquainted with a new crew that just came in, and they flew their 5 missions, and then you got 48 hours to pass. Going on. So this tail gunner on the other one, why he didn't have any money, so our tail gunner loaned him 40 pounds that goes to his R&R. So the next mission out, the other guy got shot down, and the tail gunner, hey, he owed me 40 pounds. But here he was going down in flames. So it was a death that never got repaid. Of course, then shortly after that, we lost our tail gunner over Berlin. And, that was quite a deal because we hit the IP, which is the initial point of aim. That's when you turn the airplane over to the bomb sight. The bomb sight works through the autopilot, and he lines up with gets his crosshair on the target. The airplane responds to that. And when we hit the IP, the most beautiful music you ever heard came in over the headsets. Everybody's on intercom. And we asked the radio operator, "You monkey with the radio?" "No." He says, "I don't know where that came from. I didn't touch anything." And just about that time, then the tail gunner hollered, "I've been hit." And by the time we dropped the bomb, before we could get to him, he disappeared. And we couldn't contact him. So our bombardier was our doctor on board. So I told him that was the angel coming after our tail gunner. It happened that one time, and I can't explain it otherwise. You have a question?
Yes. Did you have heavy resistance over the North Sea? Because I imagine if you fly from England to Europe,
Yeah,
Where
well,
did you-
it was after we got on into their territory, across the open sea there. They wouldn't come out and meet you. They knew you was coming in because most of it was after you got about to the Rhine River, because we had escort up until that time. We had the British Hurricanes and Spitfires and the P-47. Their range couldn't take us up to our target. So you can see the target, when you're crossing the Rhine and your escort would come up and they'd flip their wings like that, meaning they was going home. Then you could look over here and see all these little black dots in the sky waiting for you. And as soon as they turned and went back, well then here come the Germans. So you didn't have too much sweat until after our escort left. Anybody else have a question? Yeah.
How many men were in this plane?
10.
What was your task?
Huh?
What was your task? What did you do?
Well, my task, I was flight engineer and top turret gunner. I was the one in the top, right in the cockpit. And so it had a very computing site which you could line up on your targets and pull the trigger. But, I got knocked out of that twice, so one time, I don't know, you don't have that little Bible, do you?
Heart shield.
They gave us a little Bible that had stainless steel back and front. And then you had your harness that went over the top here and the two snaps where your chute went. And that was your shroud lines that went up. Well, we got a burst of flak just in front of our number 2 engine, and it knocked the engine out, and also at the same time something hit me right in the chest. Well, you're up in that turret, you can't see anything because you got a 50 caliber right along each side, and that gun sight right here. So you don't have any vision of anything else. So when that hit, I thought it was dead for a few moments, and then finally I moved my fingers, they moved, my arm moved, and I thought, well, it couldn't be bad. So I got down out of the turret, and what had happened, the flak had hit me, hit the area, it cut the shroud lines, ripped my high-heated suit, and lodged in the bomb bay door. And then I was sweating out coming back because when I had 3 engines, and that's the ones that the fighters would pick on, and if I'd had to bail out, I only had 1 shroud line on this side. As soon as the parachute opened, well, it just threw me out of the corner. So that was my biggest fear then, was that I'd be thrown out and fly with no wings. Anybody else have something?
Yeah, question.
At any time did you ever just want to give up
Do what?
or go home?
Do what? Say it again.
Did you ever just want to give up and go home at any point?
Oh, yeah, each time they were shooting at you, you'd say, boy, if I ever get my 2 feet back on the ground, I'm never coming back up. Next minute, you're right back up there saying the same thing. It's just, when you got back, you didn't have enough courage to go tell them you was scared. But everyone was frightened because, you know, they're trying to shoot you. And one thing they did, I went over there, we was all just kids, you know, really. And I hadn't drank. Then after a mission, they'd give you a big double shot of whiskey. And so I didn't drink for take that, said, you're gonna break down and you probably cause the whole crew to be gone. So he took me over to the bar and he ordered 2 of those shots. And so I figured one for me, one for him. I drank mine and then he pushed his over and said, drink that one. So I drank that one and he said, now go get in bed. So I just hit the high spots between there and the barracks. And then I went to bed and I just passed out. Well, it happened to be the only night the Germans came over and strafed our base. They bombed the hangar and strafed 3 of the bombers and caught them on fire and they burned. But when I finally woke up the next morning, the barracks was empty, there was nobody around. And it was too late for breakfast. So I got on my bike and I rode up to the British had a little kind of a canteen. So I went in there and to get something to eat, and everybody was talking about the Germans coming over and bombing, you know, and strafing. And man, it was all beer, you know, word. And they said, oh man, there's 3 of the bombers that burned. I said, go down there and look. So I got on my bike and went down there, and sure enough, just the charred remains of 3 of the bombers. And the bomb happened to hit just out one end of the hangar. And so I finally went back to the barracks, and the guys were there, you know. So I said, hey, how come you guys didn't wake me up so I get in the bomb shelter? They said, oh, we tried, you're dead. So they all got in the bomb shelter, and I slept right through it all. So I missed it. But, that's like London. Our first R&R, we went to London, but there, the bombs and those missiles coming in, they was almost as bad as flying over Germany, because if we get out, you know, at night, you know, they'd see these lights trying to pick up the bombers. Well, we wanted to look, and the bobbies there would push you back in and say, get the tube. So we'd stand in the doorways of the buildings because all that shrapnel coming down. So they say you get killed. But after that, well, on the train ride back to our base, the train had just started moving, and all once it hit a real jar, you know, and there the trains are little kind of like boots, a bench here with an aisle down the outside, so you was in each one of these little compartments. So our crew was in there, plus there was a couple of Englishmen, and so he asked, Jones said, what's the matter, can he drive this thing, you know? And one of the Englishmen said, don't you know what that was? Just outside the window here, you can see the smoke and everything boiling up to where the missile hit. So after that, that was too close to go there anymore. So we go get the train going north, we go into Edinburgh, Scotland. It was up there at night. Go out at night, and there's a few lights, not many. But London, there's no lights. You bump into a telephone pole or something and say, excuse me, you think it's a person, but that dense fog we have there is not a good place. But I was there once. And then after I graduated from work, retired, well, I took my wife back over to show where I was out at. And so we was there in London. That was in the summertime. It was a pretty good weather there. It rained, but we go to see different things, museums and things. But we've got another good place.
What was your first mission like? What were you feeling?
Well, the first mission was kind of an eye-awakening. Actually, we were supposed to fly spares. So you'd have the formation of 48 bombers, and then you'd have 2 spares. And so you'd fly, take off after they did, and fly along the formation until they crossed the channel. And then they all stayed up there, and then you just came back to the base. Well, it was almost to across the channel. I noticed the right wing man on the lead squadron was falling back. You know, he couldn't keep up. So finally, we were about ready to turn and go back to base. Well, he dropped out, so then we took his place. So here we were, our first mission, flying right wing on the lead. And the target was Berlin. And Big B is like taking a stick and poking a hornet's nest, because they put everything they've got in Germany up after you. And everybody would say, man, go to Big B on your first, that's your last. And that's what we had in our in formation. We said, well, Mac, hold us in formation, and we'll take care of the Germans. And no one was more surprised than we were that we made it back. That was our first, good eye opener too. Break in for 34 more of them. But, on our last mission, we got hit up with the jets, which was the difference. They're just in and out so fast that you can't hardly have a chance to beat that. Does anyone else have it? Okay.
What type of training did you have to go through?
For training?
Yeah.
Well, we started out, you had to go through flight engineer school and gunnery school. And then we went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's where they formed us into the crew. And then we went to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and we took our bombing training there. We, I don't know how many weeks we were there, but we flew, that was where we first got our training in B-17s. And so we mock bombed Fort Worth and Dallas, and then we would go out over the channel, and they'd throw targets, and we'd shoot at these targets. But most all this was low-level flying, up to 10, 12,000 feet. So, but when we got into combat, we were flying at 27 to 32,000 feet, which is up there at that altitude. It's about 60 below zero, and as you fly along, you leave these heavy contrails. You see airlines go by and leave the contrails. What do you think of 48 bombers in a group? How big of a contrail they leave with 4 engines? Well, the Germans kind of got wise, and they'd sneak up in those contrails and get right on your tail where you couldn't see them, and then they'd blast you. So if it had radar, we could have spied them, but that was all came afterwards. So it's a game that you had to play. Someone else have a good one? Yeah.
How often did you get to take a shower or get changed in different clothes or anything?
Well, probably twice a week, so there's cold water in you, and you didn't want to get too many showers in cold water. Living conditions were better than the ground people. So we had on one of our missions into Stettin, Germany, which was a oil refinery, and we had lost our ball gunner on this mission, and we had a spare, and it was his first mission, and he'd been in the infantry, and he'd look and see us fly up there, and he'd say, boy, those guys just go back to a warm bed and hot food. So I'm gonna put him in the air gunner. So he put in. They shipped him over there. Well, it just happened to be he was our ball gunner for that flight. Well, as we came up before we hit the IP, we always had hit the IP downwind, so we could get as much speed as we could across the target and be out of the flak as soon as possible. Well, he left over, saw another group going over, and he said, boy, they're getting shot at over there. We said, yeah, that's our target too. And he never heard another peep out of it. And we went across the target. Well, that's when I got knocked out of the chair, and we lost an engine, and we went into a dive, and the time I came to, we were just pulling out of the dive out over the Baltic Sea, and we couldn't get anything out of this ball gunner, and finally had the waist gunner crank the chair up and see what was the matter, and he was just sitting there shaking like that. And what he'd done, he took a flak apron out and put it over the window so he could see out. So if he couldn't see, well, then it didn't bother him so much. But then when he pulled his black apron up, that window was shattered. And the black apron had saved him. But when he got back, he said, I'm going back to the entry. He says, at least I can dig a hole. Up there, there's nothing to do but sit there and take what's coming. Who else has it? Okay.
When you were drafted or enlisted, did you just choose to go into the Air Force?
Well, yeah, I volunteered for the Air
You
Force
volunteered.
because I wanted airplanes. I mean, I don't know, it was, well, before I went in the Air Force, I was working at the Air Force servicing fuel, you volunteer, you can get in. If they draft you, you don't know where you're going. So, I didn't want to walk. See, you got a question?
Carl's kind of modest and stuff. You should have tell the story. He actually evaded the Germans when he bailed out of those plants. Great story.
Well, that was the Christmas Eve that I was telling you about that we took off in 30 seconds intervals and you couldn't see your wingtip. You had to use the lights at the end of the wing lights. Well, we went in at 16,000 feet, and you know they could blow us out of the sky at 27,000. So that was at the Belgian Bulls, and the Germans and the Air Forces were so close together that they didn't want to take a chance of us dropping bombs on our own troops. So we went into 16,000 feet, so we make sure our bombs was on the Germans. And of course at that altitude, they kick you out like chickens. So we got hit, we dropped our bombs, and then we got hit with a 88 and our right wing, and then just a sheet flame. So we bailed out, and I was up in the nose right by the end of the cockpit, so I had to get down and pull the handle to release the door and then kick the door open, so the rest of them could get out. So I went out first, and I was there, so I just rolled out and pulled my chute and landed. It had been raining and muddy, so I hid this chute in the hedgerow and went over to a barn on this farm. And I thought, well, I'll go up in the hayloft and hide in the hay. And so when I got up there, I looked around and man, this was the first place I ever looked. So I went back down. Well, when I went up, I left all this mud on the steps. But then there was the hay right next to the barn, so I crawled inside the haystack between the barn and the hay and worked my way in. And the Germans came, and you could hear them laughing by seeing that mud going up the steps. So they run up there, and they looked around, they couldn't find nobody, so they hollered, out, out, and nobody came out. So then they started jabbing in the hay with the fork. Nobody came out. So then they went to the house. They thought maybe the French had taken hit us. So you could hear them there. They talking, but couldn't understand what they're saying. But their voices, they weren't too good to them. So then they came back out, and they went back up in the hayloft, and then they took their machine gun and they just strafed anything a guy could hide in. You couldn't find nobody up there, so then they came down out of the barn, and anything a guy could hide in, they strafed it. Well, when you're scared, you can get awful close to the ground. And so down there, you hear the bullets going through the hay. So then I was afraid that they'd set it on fire with a tracer or something. So I was sweating that out, but it had been raining and everything, so it was pretty muddy, so, and the hay was damp. So I stayed there for 3 days, and finally the third day I figured, well, I got to do something. No food, no water, no nothing. And I could hear some tanks. So I said, well, I'll go surrender to the tanks because they're not as mean as the infantry was. So the infantry, if you got in their way, they'd shoot you and leave you instead of trying to take you back there prison. So I went over there, and those tanks were going east, and they had big white stars on them. But I went and surrendered anyway, even if we're Americans. So they took and stopped, and they radioed back, said, we can't, we got the Germans on the run. And he said, we'll radio back and somebody come pick us up on the Jeep. So just to keep heading back that way, where they're coming from. So I did, finally a Jeep, the lieutenant came up and picked it up and took me back to a field and then flew me back into our base in the C-47. So that was a nice Christmas. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell us what happened on that one picture that's going around? Because I see the plane does. Apparently an emergency landing or something.
The story is there. You can read it later. But just as we dropped our bombs, we got hit heavy with some flak. Okay, we lost 2 engines. So, and one engine was on fire, and so we went into a dive to put the fire out. So what we do, reach over, shut the fuel off to that engine, and then the flight engineer had to get down behind the cockpit to the door you could open and select what engine is on fire, and then turn the got their fire out, and by the time we got the fire out, we were at about 500 feet. So we headed back to England on 2 engines at treetop level. So as we were coming across the channel, what it do, and to show that even in times like that, there's a little humor in it. Bombardier sitting up there, you know, and he kept saying, the navigator says, "Are we out of Germany yet?" And the navigator said, "Well, you look down there and there's a red line." And he said, "When we cross that, we're out of Germany." So we flew on a while more, and Bombardier, he asked the navigator, "You sure we're not out of Germany?" And Dick said, "Well, have you seen that red line?" He said, "No, I haven't seen no red line." And he said, "Well, there should be one there. There's one on the map." So, as we crossed the channel, the White Cliffs of Dover was facing you, so you had to climb. So we climbed up to 3,000 feet. Well, to do that, you had to push those little engines on for all they get, you know. And our cylinder head temperature was way up in the red. So just about 10 miles out from our base, why, one of them quit. So that only left us one engine, and it doesn't fly very good on one engine. So we just firewalled that engine and called for emergency landing straight in. And just as we crossed the runway, that engine died, and we dropped like a rock. And so we just at stalling speed, and then we went sliding down the runway in a ball of flame. And finally, I don't know, I was just waiting for it to explode, because generally that's what happened. They just explode, and I was waiting for the big boom. And the Bombardier came up out of the nose, where he bumped me, kind of brought me back too. He's a little chubby fellow, so I was afraid he might get in that, because you just got about that much room to cross through the Bombay to get out. Well, the front door was laying on the ground, you couldn't get out of it. And so we went back there and kicked the back door of the Bombay open, and man, we was out of there and nothing flat. So we were running out across the field, and the ambulance come up and said, "Get in." And we said, "No, wait till we get further enough away before it blows up." So finally we got out further enough on. The fire crew was all there spraying it with foam, and they got the fire out before it blew. Otherwise, we'd been sailing high. Okay,
How many different planes did you fly in?
well, it was about 4, actually. So the first one we got was the Devil Ball, and another crew lost it. So then we got another one, and then we ditched it in the North Atlantic. And then the one I bailed out of, and then this one here that we crashed. So when we went bombed Kiel, it was the big warehouses there, and the Germans owned Norway, and they bring all the supplies down in these warehouses and then distribute them to the Germans. Well, our target was to blow those warehouses up, and so then that time the Germans came from off on the Baltic Sea. I know the first time I saw them, they was out over the sea coming in at us, and we bombed it, and just as we bombed it, we got accurate flak, and it knocked out 3 of our engines, and it threw us in a dive, and we couldn't pull it out. Finally, it was down about 18,000 feet, but we got in a heavier air, we was able to pull it out. We headed for the North Sea, and we got out just 12 miles from Holland in the North Sea, and we went in the ocean. And so we pulled our little dinghy boats, got into those, and the ship, airplane, it sunk. And we was out there, and about 9 o'clock at night, while we could hear this. Well, you didn't bring the radio, we have a radio that you have a little helium bottle, and you pop it, and it fills this balloon that takes your antenna in it. And you just crank that crank, and that sends out a SOS, and they can turn in. Well, the British controlled the area there, so they knew what area we were flying to. And of course, 9 o'clock at night, it was dark, and we could see the floodlights searching the water. Man, we were happy we would be saved, and then the wastelands of water. Man, then you give you another thought. What else they are, because you don't know whether they're on a machine gun you, or whether they're going to take you to prison or what. So, time the British came, we thinking now, are they German or are they British? So you look in that light, you don't see anything. Finally, they some guy on the ship there, he says, I say they're on chops, are you all right? And boy, I tell you, we jumped up like that. So they pulled us on board and they sunk our steamboats and took us back in. So that was the first one we lost. But, it was kind of rough flying all of them, I tell you. You got another one?
If you lost a plane, did the Army do any effort to retrieve it, or
No, if it was, didn't take, you couldn't fix it very easy, well, they could use it as spare parts. So parts was kind of hard to get, and planes, you'd flying them over. When we went over, we flew a bomber from the States into Ireland, and then they picked it up and take it to a base where they got them ready for combat, took off the de-icer boots and a lot of other things. They just get them ready for combat. And us, they took and sent us to, well, we took a ferry across into Liverpool, and then they picked us by a bus to a base called Stone. And Stone was a supply depot of crew, that's what it was. And then each morning, well, when you got there, you'd sign your crew at the bottom of the list. And then each morning, everybody would fall out, and they'd say, well, so many crews, they call them, they're off this base and that base, each base. So I told them, I said, man, look how many crews they lost yesterday. And we went to, we was there 3 days, and they called our name. They took 8 crews. So our base, 100 bomb groups took 12, and they took the most. But you could just tell by how many crews went to these bases how many they were losing. And so then what they do, you keep crews there. Like today they lost 4 crews, where they call there and send 4 more crews. So the 4 crews would go there, and they'd also get 4 new airplanes. So it was kind of a steady stream of bombers going over, and a stream going down too. But, anybody else have one? Yeah.
Did you have any friends before you went into the war that went with you?
No, because we met our crew at Lincoln, Nebraska, and so you became like brothers, really. So you had to work together to protect your own life. There's everybody was like brothers, you know. I have a friend in other parts of the service, but they didn't go into the combat fight. Another question? Yeah.
what is it that you did on the plane? Were you a bombardier or?
Flight engineering. Which, you know, right in the top of the B-17, you got B-17. Here's B-17. Right in the top, see this shirt right there? Yeah. Yeah.
So when you got in the dark side with planes in the air?
No, B-17's like driving a truck, really. That's what we were. We were flying trucks. We took our bomb load was our cargo, and our target was where we released our bombs. And it'd be like a big 18-wheeler going down the highway with Corvettes out there trying to chase him. So that's like them there. Maybe 109s, they could buzz in around you, because we'd fly about 200 miles an hour, and they'd be going about 400 miles an hour. So, and they would come out and get ahead of you, and then come straight right back in you, because they'd be going about 400, you 200, so about 600 miles closing range. So you only had a few seconds to shoot. And they had 20s, and we only had 50s, so they had more range than we did. So you notice in those movies up there where they would shoot from the back and into the wings to, set you on fire, so that fuel. So we had your 100 octane on board. And,
sometimes it's hard to think, at 60 below zero, what living conditions are for 10 hours at 60 below zero. Like I said, the planes are not pressurized, and you have to dress for the warmth. And he was telling me, about how
27, which is 5 miles high, and it's cold up there, and as your breath, you know, the oxygen mask exhaust right here under your chin, well, that air would condense into water, so the whole front of your May West, which is used for if you went in the water to float, would be a solid sheet of ice. It might be an inch, inch and a half thick. And by the time you got back to the base, you could just peel that off and toss it out. You get a big chunk of ice. And inside the plane, we had to wear silk gloves because if we had a malfunction in our gun or something, we could fix it. But if you didn't have, and you touched metal with your fingers, why, it would just, you know, they'd glue them right there to it. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen pictures, touch something with your tongue, and you get out of the freezer and have glues to it. Well, that's the way it would be. Someone else have something? Yeah.
Did you have like a left arm or was it fully defined or you
What was that again?
Did you have a good left arm or did you
Well,
put one on the floor?
yeah, I had a 4-leaf clover that I carried on the lapel of my flight jacket. And that was a bad story. My wife, my flight jacket, it's like this, you know, had these cuffs and the waistband in it. I finally wore them out, and I had it hanging out in the garage. The wife gave it to the Salvation Army. So that's what happened to my flight jacket. But my silk scarf, I still have, and my oldest daughter, she was about 3. She found it one day and was cutting it up and making dog clothes. So I still have what's left of it. Someone else have something? Yeah.
What were you feeling when, like, you heard that the war was over and you could go home?
Well, I was home before the war was over. See, I only had to fly 35 missions. So when I flew my 35 missions, then I came back to the state and I started training for B-29s in the South Pacific. And well, when I got shot there and that with that flag, well, I also shorted out my suit, heated suit, so there was like an electric blanket, and you had a control on the wall. You could increase or decrease the voltage. But my feet froze. So when I was going to school in Chanute, Illinois, in the wintertime, and it's cold up there, well, my feet went out on me from the cold, so I was marching to class one morning, and so I just collapsed, so they took me in an ambulance to the hospital, and then I had to sit there in this bath. Well, that forced me out of that, going to South Pacific. So I ended up flying co-pilot on C-47s out of Scott Field for training radio students. So I spent the rest of the war there. And so I was back in the States when the war was over. Somebody else? Yeah.
How old were you when you volunteered?
I was 20.
Were there like a lot of younger ones?
Oh yeah, there was younger ones. Our tail gunner, I guess, was the youngest. The rest of us was all pretty mature. Our waist gunner, he was in the gliders, and he kind of worked out of gliders, so he ended up in waist gunner. And so, in a crew like that, you have all walks of life. If you remember the movie they made of Memphis Belle, and the beginning, how it tells what each one did. And so, you all come together, though, and survive as long as you can.
The oldest guy on the plane? The oldest guy?
Do what?
The oldest guy on the plane?
I think the pilot was the oldest.
How old was he?
I don't know, he might have been 24.
Wasn't it hard because a lot of because people were young, they didn't have any experience flying the plane?
Well, I tell you, like I say, on the first mission, you got all the experience you need. And going over there, I mean, and during training and everything, it seems, you know, pretty simple. You know, just flying around doing this and that. And like in training for overseas out of Ardmore, well, the flight engineer also had to be able to land the airplane in case you lost your pilot, co-pilot. And then to repair things in flight, what we had to repair mostly in flight would be the superchargers. If you start losing the supercharger, then you start losing manifold pressure, and then so that engine at high altitude can't function. So you start dropping out. Well, it's my job to go change the amplifier, which is in the radio room. You had to take up the control boards on the right-hand side and change the amplifier. Well, when I do that, then the co-pilot would get up my turret and be gunner there for while I was doing that. And then you get your manifold pressure back in and you get back up in formation. But it's just a lot of things you had to do, and it was either life or death at it, so you had to do it.
How did you stay focused on what you were supposed to do with the fear element?
Well, it just automatically, really. Because the fighters, you just tracked them and shot at them, which was easier than the flak because you could fight back. But the flak, you couldn't do anything. It was just there, you know. You could see it just like hands grabbing at you. And so I don't know, you just, I don't know. It's hard to say. You just go do it. Yeah.
Were you already married when you were?
No.
When you came back, you got married?
Yeah, after I came back, I was back a couple of years before I got married. And then I got married and had a daughter. She was 2 years old when I got a telegram saying come back. So then I had to go to Korea. And so I spent a couple years in Korea then. But there I was on transports with hauling supplies from Japan into Korea. And C-46s, which is a twin-engine transport. And there we'd go to all the different stations, deliver freight, and bring them back. Some of the guys would get sent for R&R, and bring out the sick, dead, and wounded, and I don't know, it was a flying job. Somebody else have something? Yeah.
How long did it take for you to like finish 45 missions? What was like the span of time?
About a year. No, it was about 8 months, I think. So you'd have a lot of bad weather, and then sometimes you wouldn't fly. And then we got 1 week of R&R in the middle of it, so. Yeah.
What is RDO?
It's what they call rest and recuperation. It's, you go to, well, they had some hotels that you could go to, but I went up into Scotland because it was more peaceful up there, and then you could see, you know, what English was, and go through the old Scottish castle at Edinburgh, and a lot of different things you could do up there rather than just go to a hotel and kind of lay around and eat.
Is any of your crew still alive?
I don't know. I've lost contact with all of them. Here's when I was up in Scotland. You see, I've got on my kilt. There, just you come out of the train station up there on the main street, there's a photography shop, and you can put on those clothes there and play like you're a Scottish general. You know. So, I was a Scottish. And then this picture on the top here, this one, was one used for you shot down in France. The French would make up your paperwork that you were a Frenchman. So I'm a Frenchman then. And if the Germans caught you without that or your uniform, they would shoot you as a spy. So we had the picture there. And you can see my hair is a little darker than it was then.
Did you learn any other languages?
Do what?
Did you learn any other languages?
Well, I learned a few sentences in German when I was over there. They teach you in case you got captured. And then in Japan, I learned a few over there also, but not where you carry on a conversation. You, with them, you know, you kind of learn some of the things. Yeah.
You don't really have to answer if you don't want to, but what would you say was one of your worst experiences?
What was that? I didn't get the last part.
What would you say was one of your worst experiences?
Still didn't catch it.
What was your worst experience?
Oh, worst?
Very worst experience.
Well, probably that crash was probably the worst, because you just expected it to blow up, and it didn't blow up. And he was coming back across Germany with about 2.5 hours getting out of Germany and back to England, and you don't know how long he's going to stay in the air because he lost the engines and lost fuel, and you just hoping he can make it back. And when you finally dropped out and expected then for it to blow up, well, I don't know. There wasn't any of them real joyful, I think.
How long did the fuel tanks last you?
Well, on a morning before you had a long, big, say, 11-hour mission, they would take and run their pre-flight and then top off the fuel. So you had every gallon you could get on board, and if you managed right, you could get 11 hours out of it, because we had what they call Tokyo tanks, which is all the way out to almost to the wingtips. Between each rib you had a small tank, and so it would didn't make it back. But, a lot of times you'd be shot up and coming back on the deck on 2 or 3 engines. You had a flight engineer, you have to go into Bombay in a forward bulkhead and transfer fuel, so you keep kind of balancing out the fuel for the engine so you keep it going.
What is the big metal in your metal?
Which one?
The very big one on the top. Middle?
This one?
Yeah.
That's the wing that wore them cap when I was in the cadets. So that's just the wing. These are the flight engineer wings. These are bombardier gunner's wings. There's 2 sets, a large one and a small one. And then there's the dog tags I wore. And the 8th Air Force is here.
Talk about the 8 balls.
The 8th ball, you mean? Yeah, well, that was our squadron patch. It was, our commanding officer was Colonel Ball, and so we named the squadron the Ball Boys. And it was a baseball with wings with a bomb through it. So we wore that on our leather jackets. And that way they knew which squadron he was with. And on the back of the jacket, you bring a bomb for every mission you made.
Yeah, celebrity in your outfit too.
Oh, yeah, we had, I don't know if they knew who Clark Gable was. Gone with the Wind, he was he flew in our squadron. He was through 4 missions. And he made a movie, actually, I have a copy of it. It's the Combat America, where our group formed in the United States and flew over to England, and we took over an old British base. And we flew out of it. And he made these movies like 12 o'clock high. I don't know if you saw that. He was in there in the waist gun, and he would take, when the gunners were shooting, but he'd be over there shooting, taking pictures of the Germans coming in and shooting back at you. A lot of those pictures were taken by Clark Gable.
We've got about 12 minutes before the bell's going to ring, and I wondered if we could get a picture, and then if you guys have more questions after that, but can we do that? Yeah. I'd like to do a class picture with Mr. Barnes. Would that be all right? You guys can just head up and sort of gather around. I'll get a shot of all of you. Sure. Can I frame it real quick? I want to make sure I get it.
Absolutely.
Sometimes take some coaxing to get those. It's still filming, so I can get those. Oh. All right, you're going to have to get really much closer. I'll need those of you on the end. If some of you wouldn't mind kneeling in the front.
Yeah. All right.
Come on,
I think the kneeler is here.
Kristen, come on over, Christian. There you go. Kneel. Go ahead and kneel down. Rodney, can you kneel down in front? Paul.
There you go.
Yeah, I'm only got, holy smokes, I don't have, oh wait, turning it on. Boy.
Ivan, I need you to come around too. All right, I've got, wow, from, yeah, this whole section I don't have in yet. Can one of you scoot around in the front? And slide closer if you can.
Just a little bit forward, once you two kneel down a little bit, you guys can kind of lunge in here.
I really would like to have y'all. Okay, I don't have, okay. Ooh, there's something. Paul, if you can scoot in a little bit closer, we've got everybody. Yeah, that's, oh, perfect. There we go. But they're all on.
Push the red.
Yeah. Let's do two just to be safe.
There you go.
Let's do one more.
One more. Everybody's going to get it good. There we go. Anybody else want to finish off with something? Any questions?
I always wanted to know, which are all those little rectangle things, what are they?
Ribbon?
Yeah.
Well, actually, those are the ribbons along these metals. It's the same thing, you know, instead of wearing the metals, you just wore the ribbons. Otherwise, you have a full checkbook.
I always do that in
You put the metal off and you just wear that. And then like on the air metal, you've got a silver star and two little clusters for each 5 missions. And so I have 35. And on this I have a silver star on it, which represents 5 major battles. So each thing has a little, means something. And this one here is a Korean victory medal. That's I got Korean. And for 50 years of peace that they've had since the freedom.
Kind of exciting is what Charles also, when he came back from the war, what you actually did the rest of your life, you know, you could, get stuff where you worked. And
So I worked out at NASA and on the X-15 and 10 years that we used there to explore going to outer space and entering into the density of the air, the heat, and actually found out how to bring in a plane back in one piece. And it was the preliminaries of the shuttle and then also of the lifting bodies, which the shuttle is as far as it came from that. And then I worked with what's called the Blackbird, done a lot of experiments or high-speed research on it. And then I went into engineering and I developed a water tunnel, which is the same thing as a wind tunnel, only you use water, which is 2,000 more dense than air. And you can photograph. We had 2 video cameras, one on the face and then one on the side. And in the model, you can change your model attitude and different angles and see where you, by using, you use cake dies, or so where you could see the vortexes. And you could tell where you had lift and where you had drag. And that's the way we also the test on the shuttle. See what angle you can come in with and keep the most lift and still coming in. So we done that. In fact, they gave me a big picture of it. All the engineers signed it. So, I don't know, it was a real interesting life I had out there at NASA. Yeah.
Like overall, how do you see your life?
Well, I see it as interesting, really, because you know, as a kid, you start working around airplanes when they had the old airplanes, and then went through the war, and I worked for 5 years in the oil field as a mechanic, repairing the machinery, Florida for a year, and then my wife didn't like Florida because they have hurricanes down there, and she's scared of those, so I got out and came back to the state, California, and I ended up out here in Edwards, until I retired.
So you're retired right now?
Yeah.
How was it celebrating your 50th wedding anniversary?
53rd.
53rd. Wow. We need a round of applause for that.
54 in June.
54 in June.
June 14th will be 53. But we got to eat over hometown buffet for free. Yeah. Took your picture, and then they had a part with the number of years, and ours is 53.
We had a discussion about the groundbreaking ceremony. And we'd like to see one of us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Have about 5 minutes before the
Comment? Okay.
I just thought your glasses are.
Thank you. Well, that's why I thought Edwards was a great place, because if anything new came to Edwards to be tested. And so I got to work on everything. F-86 is there through the shuttle. So, part of the space and, going to space, we developed moon landers that landed on the moon. I developed that out of there. NASA does a lot of research. So,
You know, I try to emphasize and stuff, when you can actually talk to a veteran, Carl, I think that these guys won't be around forever. And this is just a great opportunity for you guys to sit there and actually talk to somebody instead of reading it out of a book. Hey, I was in high school. I know how this is good. What do we have? When actually we have somebody you can talk to that years from now, somebody can come up to you and say, you know what, I actually talked to one of those guys. I actually heard his story in person, like you, if there was a person from the Civil War, wanted to, get a feel for what it was like to fight the Civil War. You can't do that nowadays. All you can do is read it out of a book. So, you see these gentlemen around town, and ladies, there's 350,000 women that served also. Don't be shy. Don't talk to these guys. They're not going to be here forever. We lose 1,000 World War II veterans a day. So, and a lot of these are your grandparents and your grandmothers. So, believe it or not, everybody in here can guarantee had somebody that had something to do with the Second World War. So you need to ask questions even about your own family. Because your granddaughter is obviously a very lucky young lady. You think of, she has this kind of legacy in her family. But you know what? I bet you if you guys did a lot of research, you'd find out you have a lot of legacy.
I just found out on Sunday that my great-grandpa was in World War I and the spring.
Wow.
I didn't know that until Sunday.
Yeah.
Generally, everyone has somebody in the distance that was in one of them. So, well, after World War II, it took everybody, even people back home, supplied. We didn't have people back here to build those airplanes, and we couldn't fly them. So that was a great part.
It's amazing to me to hear your story. The Christmas Eve that he was referring to, my father-in-law was on the same night. And reflects in his diary what a horrible night it was. So it's so small world to me to hear you talk about that mission. I know that my husband's dad, who was flying in a few sections, he was also on the same evening.
I don't know what group he was with.
I can look, I have it.
Yeah. I was the 351st was our bomb group.
He was 490.
Oh.
490. He kept a diary.
Yeah. Well,
the first time that road got
Yeah,
repaired.
because he never talked about it. And, my brother, he was in the Navy here, and he was in Oklahoma, got hit with a tomahawk. Well, he talked about that, but somehow or another, he just never did get around to it. So, he helped me write the book. I'd write it and send it to him on his computer, and